They have called her Little Boy, Four Piper, Gut Bucket, and Tin Can. Ingenuity, time, and circumstance have made her not merely the most versatile, but pound for fighting pound, the most efficient naval craft ever devised. She's the American destroyer, Greyhound of the Sea. No doubt the true origin of the modern destroyer lies somewhere in obscurity. But many believe that her genesis originated with the commissioning of Torpedo Boat Destroyer Number 1, the USS Bainbridge, on November 24th, 1902. She could travel at the relatively swift speed of 29 knots, carried 2 3-inch guns, 5 6-pounders, and sported 2 torpedo tubes. And her first mission in life was to combat the torpedo boat, a deadly weapon that had grown to prominence following the Civil War and the invention of the Whitehead self-propelled torpedo in 1866. Since the torpedo boat was a cheaply constructed, yet highly responsive vessel, many Navy men believed that squadrons of her kind might one day be able to neutralize a Navy with much heavier ships. Any counter-weapon against her needed to possess speed, maneuverability, and gutty staying power. These attributes have become the trademark of all of the lean gray ships that followed the Bainbridge down the ways. A trademark that would earn them the title Destroyer. During the years prior to 1917, various improvements, including increased stability and the change from reciprocating engines to steam turbines, made little difference in the destroyer's essential mission. But as the guns of the Great War echoed across the Atlantic, the little boys suddenly found themselves important adjuncts to the scouting and screening line of the fleet. World War I became the destroyer's first real baptism under fire. It was in this sphere of combat that America's newly designed flush-decked 4 Pipers proved their versatility. Against a different breed of torpedo boat, the German submarine. By April of 1917, the German U-boats had established a strangling circle around the British Isles. The Allies' only hope of victory lay in breaking this cordon through use of the convoy system. It was here that the insolent young American destroyers proved their mettle as savage infighters and defenders of the food, munitions, and troops bound for England and the continent. This was the first test. It was a severe one. But the tin cans came through. They proved themselves not only adept at convoy escort and defense, but as fledgling hunter-killers during the early trial and error years of anti-submarine warfare. By war's end, the compact bridge of the gallant 4 Piper had become a sought-after and cherished command by rising young officers of the fleet. But the illusion of peace and freedom, assured by victory, brought tragedy to the destroyer force. With the Great Naval Disarmament Treaty of 1922, over 200 of the little boys were stricken from the active list. And the construction of new destroyers came to a standstill for nearly 12 years. Even the eventual addition of the newer Farragut and Porter-class destroyers after 1934 did little to alleviate a problem of growing obsolescence. However, if there was one thing that destroyer men had learned during World War I, it was how to survive. And so, during the 30s, they made do with what they had. They kept their tools sharp with constant training and discipline, and welded their small force into a formidable fighting unit. While at the same time, they must have looked over their shoulders with envy at the big boys. In the eyes of the public at large, the Navy was symbolized by the powerful-looking battleship with its 16-inch guns and constant and comfortable aura of tradition and showmanship. By 1939, it was time for many Americans to visit the New York World's Fair. For them, it was an opportunity to witness a world of the future in the making, beneath the panoramic shadows of the Trilon and Perisphere at Flushing Meadows. Few thought or worried about a different drama that was beginning to unfold out in the Atlantic. Beginning of Rudel Taktik, the Wolf Pack, an inspired and creative creation of Germany's master naval strategist, Admiral Karl Dönitz. Its assigned mission was quite simple. For the second time in less than 30 years, the German submarine would attempt to sever Britain's lifeline to the rest of the world. By late 1941, Admiral Dönitz found himself in the enviable position of being able to radio deploy from 30 to 50 submarines to selected areas where they could systematically pick off stragglers, or strike full force as a unit at large groups of merchant ships inbound for the British Isles. And so the traditional enemy of the destroyer made its second meaningful appearance on the world stage. But the American destroyer men and the entire United States Navy soon had another problem. It commenced on the morning of December 7th, 1941. The big boys were gone. It would take months, even years, before the full effect of their 16-inch guns would be felt again. A handful of cruisers, 4 aircraft carriers, and the destroyer fleet would be called upon to hold the Pacific battle line throughout 1942. In a sense, when the American battleships were bombed at Pearl Harbor, they and all of their counterparts throughout the navies of the world had become the permanent victims of air power. And so, in the years that followed, the men of the destroyer force took on new obligations and became more indispensable to another breed of men. It was the aircraft carrier, with all of its mobility, range, and striking power, implicit in its air arm, which became the queen of battle at sea during World War II. And she drew the destroyers to her, out of experience and necessity. Many a pilot lived to thumb his nose at the laws of probability because a destroyer was there. They came home the long way around, but they came home. From Guadalcanal to Bougainville to New Guinea, Peleliu, Guam, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The destroyer became a familiar sight, moving in with each invasion force. This was the kind of alley fighting they'd come to expect. Nobody had a rule book, because unlike Europe, there was no single defensive crust that could be penetrated to the enemy's heart. Instead, the Pacific offered only another island or another perimeter to be taken. And so, to aid invasion troops, the destroyer became a mobile gun platform, moving from beach to beach to take on assigned targets at point-blank range. Everywhere the destroyer went, she emerged as a jack of all trades, as a minesweeper, troop carrier, shore bombardment platform, or anti-aircraft picket, and, as expected, the arch enemy of the U-boat. There are fewer, more stirring accounts of naval surface action than that of the Battle of Leyte Gulf off Samar Island in the Philippines on October 25th, 1944. Here, 3 American destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts interposed themselves between a group of vulnerable jeep carriers and a Japanese force composed of 4 battleships, 7 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. American destroyers closed the range to within 7,000 yards, and during 2 hours of fire, fury, and pounding, torturous action, they threw everything they had into the battle. There could be only one outcome to such action. 5 American destroyers were mortally wounded. The Japanese, with only one cruiser badly damaged, mysteriously turned and ran. They thought they had encountered a much larger force, composed of cruisers and their escorts. From that moment on, the once magnificent Japanese Imperial fleet began to slip out of focus into history. Destroyer men saw them first at Leyte Gulf, and then at Lingayen. But at Okinawa, they descended like locusts. The Japanese called them kamikaze, the divine wind. And when it was over, the tin cans went out among the wounded to do what they could. With this final purge of fire and violence, the Japanese mirage of conquest died. And the American fleet survived its greatest crises in the Pacific. The very weapon that would speed World War II to its close would also provide the seed for a military controversy in the years to follow. Why keep a large standing fleet capable of fighting only a conventional war? And so history repeated itself as hundreds of destroyers joined the mothball fleet and seemingly lay forgotten in the Navy's storehouse. Then, on the morning of June 25th, 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel and invaded the Republic of South Korea. The destroyer USS De Haven and her sister ship Mansfield were dispatched immediately from the 7th Fleet and took up station during the mass evacuation of refugees from Incheon and Wonsan. This was the nuclear age, yet among the first tools of warfare summoned during the Marine landings at Incheon was the versatile but conventional destroyer. For some, it must have been an old, familiar sight. Since the Korean War, the United States Navy has been present wherever the consistent pattern of Cold War nibbling tactics have emerged. Destroyer men have stood guard for the free world at Lebanon, Formosa, Cuba, and in South Vietnam. They've represented their country as ambassadors of freedom in every corner of the world. They've brought aid and comfort to those whose world has been shattered. And they've lifted men out of the sea who have seen the world from a different perspective. Wherever they've gone and whatever task they've been asked to accomplish, destroyer men have remained a special breed of accomplished seamen. For no ship on the oceans of the world demands as much of her crew as the destroyer. Yet the destroyer is changing. Time and world circumstance haven't allowed her evolution to come to a standstill. And with this metamorphosis, more than a gradual change has taken place in her men. Working deep within their ships, they've become the modern hunter-killers of submarines. Their conversation is sprinkled with words alien to the layman's ears. ASW, ASROC, Huck, MAD, Dash. All of it part of a strange war where patience is a precious weapon and teamwork is a necessity. This is a Huck group, the hunter-killer force, born of trial and experience in World War II's Battle of the Atlantic. Normally, it's composed of an aircraft carrier with helicopters, tracker and search planes, and a squadron of 8 to 10 destroyers supported by land-based aircraft. Working as a team, the objective of the force is to locate, classify, and if need be, kill the enemy submarine. At best, their cooperation is mated to a set of technological and tactical problems that are almost overwhelming in scope. Once detected and classified, the hunter-killer team will come in to lean on the contact. Destroyers will surround him and, if need be, sit on him for days until he surfaces. If the submarine is American, the issue is over. If it's not, there are problems. But the destroyer dare not charge into an area where a patrol plane has made contact. At that moment, the sub may escape. It must stay out until conditions warrant its entry. This means delay, and delay could mean failure. So, speed, quiet operations, and a long, destructive arm are necessary. This is ASROC, the anti-submarine rocket, the new long-range destructive arm which has become a mainstay in most destroyers of the fleet. Computer controlled, it can be armed with a conventional or nuclear depth charge, depending on the need of the moment. Another addition is Dash, the unmanned helicopter that can deliver a similar punch and then return home. Adhering to the concept of defense in depth, destroyers have also been instrumental in the breeding and evolution of still another generation of weapons. The surface-to-air guided missile. Yet, with all of these advanced capabilities, the destroyer over the years has retained one inherent weakness, a constant need for refueling. Pulling her away from selected launching points or critical areas of open sea where she might be needed at any moment. This is why the nuclear-powered frigate Bainbridge has become such an important addition to today's destroyer navy. Ships like her, with vast cruising ranges, are free to exploit the full gamut of naval capabilities with every patrol at sea. They represent a great investment of men and material, an investment that could only be made by a strong and dedicated power for peace, the United States Navy. This, then, has been the destroyer story, an epic of conflict and change, of men and steel, against the timeless challenge of the sea.
This is sea mine warfare. Warfare where enemies seldom meet and battle is rarely joined. But where death and destruction always mark the field. Where the mighty fleets fight their battles, the little minecraft have already been to do their dull and deadly duty for which there is no glory. Where the fighting fleets sail to victory, there are seas of glory. But where the little ships go, there is only a most dangerous sea. Sea mines have been employed in naval warfare for more than 350 years. Until about 1880, they were known as torpedoes. Some 8 beer kegs filled with gunpowder brought about an historic reaction from Admiral Farragut when he said, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Farragut won the battles of Mobile Bay, but after the South had surrendered, he had to go in and sweep up their mines. As the first minesweeping officer of the Navy, he learned something about mine warfare. Mines never surrender. Mines are usually classified by their position in the sea, either moored or bottom. But they are also referenced by their method of actuation, which can be contact with the ship or by the ship's influence in terms of sound, pressure, or magnetism. Modern sea mine laying is carried out most often from aircraft, sometimes from submarines, and from surface craft. Aircraft can replenish minefields so that the minefield presents a constant threat to the enemy. Simple contact mines were the basic weapon of mine warfare until World War II. A large explosive charge encased in a suitable container was moored to the seafloor by an anchor so that the mine was positioned beneath the surface some 10 or 20 feet. Several triggering horns protruded from the shell. If a passing ship made contact with one of these horns, the firing circuit was closed and this same principle is still in use today in the moored contact type of mine. In clearing a contact minefield, each mine's mooring cable is cut by armed sweep wires towed from the minesweeper's stern. During sweeping operations, depressors, otters, and floats control the sweep wire with cutting gear attached. Otters force the cutting wire to extend outboard of the towing ship, where a float pennant from the float sets the cutting depth. The float may submerge as the sweep cable takes the strain when a mine is cut. After surfacing, the mine is destroyed by gunfire from another following sweeper. During World War I, the simple contact mine was joined by mines which could be set off from the shore by an electrical circuit. In World War II, still more treacherous mines were developed, types that would lie on the ocean floor and wait to be exploded by the noise of the ship, or by a reduction in water pressure caused by the ship's hull passing over, or by the effect of the ship's magnetic field as it intersects the mine's induction coil, or by combining any two or more of these triggering influences into a single mine. Magnetic influence mines were first developed by the British as early as 1917. Although it was not until the Germans commenced using aircraft to lay magnetic mines in British harbor entrances during 1939 that they became a real threat. Unlike the contact mine, magnetic mines do not have to be moored to an anchor, but can be sown freely to lie on the ocean floor. The Nazis made two mistakes when they began to use the magnetic mine in 1939. Instead of waiting until enough of them were ready so that all British ports could be mined at once, they dropped them in small numbers on only a few ports. The second mistake was inadvertent. A Luftwaffe pilot dropped one of the new magnetic mines on a mud bank of the Thames estuary instead of the harbor. The Royal Navy recovered it. Had larger quantities been available to permit widespread continuing use of the new mine, it might have permitted the Nazis to blockade this vital lifeline of England. The recovery of a single mine from the Thames estuary contributed greatly to Great Britain's success in countering the magnetic mine threat, and crude magnetic sweeps were developed. To counter magnetic mines, the minesweeper's gear must duplicate a ship's magnetic influence. Today, magnetic sweep gear consists of two large cables, a short leg and a long leg, laid out astern from a large reel. The long leg is streamed astern for about 1,200 feet. At the end of each leg is a copper electrode. With the cable streamed astern of the sweeper, a powerful generator aboard the vessel supplies pulsed currents which pass through the water or ocean bottom between the electrodes. Another method is to pass the current through a closed loop, depending upon sweep conditions. The strong magnetic field generated by the flow of current is capable of detonating magnetic mines. Acoustic influence mines are detonated by the machinery or propeller noise of a passing ship. Like the magnetic mine, it can also be planted on the sea floor. Acoustic mines use a simple hydrophone or artificial ear that is responsive to a selected sound frequency from a wide spectrum of frequencies generated by the ship's engines or propellers. When it detects such noises, its diaphragm vibrates, causing the fatal switch to close. These mines are countered by towing a device called a hammer box, which makes a sound like the ship's noises as it's towed through the minefield. In the storehouse of mine warfare, the third influence type mine is the pressure mine. Here, the positive pressure wave caused by a ship's passage, followed closely by a negative pressure wave, causes the mine to fire. If a minefield is known to contain pressure mines, ships passing through the field can, by adjusting their speed in the mined region, avoid creating the correct pressure influence. To sweep pressure mines, the changing water pressure produced by passing ships must be duplicated. The toughest type of modern mine is the combination mine, one that combines magnetic acoustic or pressure magnetic, or all three of the influence sensors in the same container. This type will explode only when the right combination of two or more of the disturbing forces are employed by the sweepers. To complicate matters even more, ship counters can be built into the firing circuit of nearly any type of mine. They can be preset to explode only after a given number of ships have passed. Thus, a minesweeper can sweep a channel a number of times, declare the channel swept, and still have a mine explode beneath the next passing ship. At the end of the war with Japan, the Pacific Fleet's mine forces had chalked up an impressive score. 50,000 mines had been laid. 1,054 enemy ships sunk. After 5 years of war, the combat ships of the fleet returned home. The sweepers remained, along with 100 Japanese sweepers, to destroy the thousands of mines laid against Japan during Operation Starvation. By March of 1946, 12,000 moored mines and 100 influence mines had been swept. Just 4 short years later, at the outset of hostilities in Korea, only 9 sweepers could be mustered for the Incheon invasion. The reserve mine forces were home in civilian jobs. The World War II ships were scrapped or in mothballs. Around this nucleus of 9 ships, the American mine force in Korea was born. Luckily, the invasion at Incheon presented no serious problem from minefields because of the tides. By timing the landing to coincide with the low tide, the minefield was exposed and easily destroyed by gunfire. With the success of the first invasion, General MacArthur decided upon an amphibious assault landing at Wonsan to relieve pressure on the 8th Army's supply lines and to prevent the escape of remnant North Korean forces in the area. Joint Task Force 7 ordered all minesweepers to the Wonsan area. Thus, on a chilling October 10th, 9 minesweepers arrived off Wonsan. How much of a cabbage patch the communists had planted was unknown. Amphibious assaults against Okinawa had been preceded by 100 sweepers, the invasion of Normandy by 300. During the first day's sweeping off Wonsan, a 12-mile channel had been cut from the 100-fathom curve to the 30-fathom curve. 21 contact mines had been destroyed. But good luck did not hold. Late afternoon, a helicopter from the USS Worcester suddenly dipped, lifted slightly, and dipped again. The pilot reported 1 mine ahead of minesweeper fled, another mine just beyond, another, and another. As the sweepers closed in from the 30-fathom curve to the beaches, overwhelming numbers of mines were encountered. Pirate and Pledge, 2 steel-hulled sweepers, went down. Casualties were heavy. After a shocking dispatch to Washington, conferences were held aboard the USS Missouri. How long will it take to sweep a path to the beach? Will the invasion be delayed? If so, what will be the effects of launching late? The decision is made. The limited sweepers still available must be given time to clear the invasion channel. Sweeping continued. Helicopters continued to be used at Wonsan. Their entry into the mine hunting business was brought about when a helicopter pilot took a picture of 2 moored mines while on a search mission for a sunken ship. Meanwhile, the ships of the invasion force waited. 50,000 troops remained aboard 250 ships. The ships steamed up and down the shore off Wonsan for days, back and forth so many times that the troops dubbed the maneuvers Operation Yo-Yo. The sweepers formed up for their last expected passage. In an hour, Wonsan Harbor would be open. Only in an hour, they were worse off than when they had started 10 days before. Wonsan Harbor was suddenly discovered to contain more mines, and no one knew what kind they were. Magnetic mines were found in large quantities. Republic of Korea's sweeper was blown to bits. Sweeping continued. On the evening of October 25th, Wonsan Harbor was finally swept clear of mines. 15 days had been spent on what should have been a 5-day job at the most. Historically, Russia has long been noted for her interest in mines, more so perhaps than any other nation in modern times. The Crimean War, the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, and the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 all saw Russia's development of mines. And now, at this place and time, they had provided their North Korean satellite with over 4,000 mines and the officers and technicians to assist in preparing them for laying. It was an excellent opportunity to test the U.S. Navy's ability to cope with mines in the Western Pacific as of 1950, and to find out how our forces would counter the threat. The opportunity was too good to be missed. Only 225 mines were swept out of the 3,000 laid by primitive craft such as junks, sampans, and barges in a 3-week period. The Marines and Army troops were finally landed on the beach, and the assault now became an administrative exercise because the South Korean Army had, in the interim, marched through Wonsan and northward. Admiral Joy summarized, "The main lesson of the Wonsan invasion is that no so-called subsidiary branch of the naval service, such as mine warfare, should ever be neglected or relegated to a minor role in the future. Wonsan taught us that we can be denied freedom of movement to an enemy objective through the intelligent use of mines by an alert foe." Sea mines have a psychological value that's immeasurable. There's something frightening when your opponent is a mindless automatic machine. It's there, you know it, and it's not going to make a mistake. But if you do, it may kill you. It's much easier to bring a nation faced with a mine blockade and the certainty of starvation to the conference table to negotiate a peaceful settlement than with any other form of warfare. A mine blockade enables the winner to triumph without killing. Enemy ships lost in a minefield have entered it by their own choice. The enemy could have kept them in port. But most important, mines do not destroy homes, schools, hospitals, or industrial facilities necessary to peacetime rehabilitation. Among the sane nations of the world, the threat of an atomic holocaust has brought about nuclear stalemate. Yet nuclear parity has not eliminated the so-called limited war, which may range from small police actions to full-scale wars employing everything except nuclear weapons. In limited warfare, the sea mine has many unique characteristics which are useful to the military planner. Once delivered, the sea mine does not require manned direction. It can wait alone, unattended, for its target. It can increase the tactical effectiveness of any delivery vehicle, for only with a waiting weapon, such as a mine, can the vehicle project its threat in many places at once. Conservation of forces, a built-in feature of sea mine warfare, makes it well suited to the needs of limited wars. Blockading of harbors and sea lanes using tactical ships is always effective, but a minefield can help reduce the number of tactical units required to maintain a blockade, and can effectively seal off the area if the ships must leave for even a few days. Or the area can be saturation mined, releasing the surface forces for duty elsewhere. Mines may also be preset to render themselves harmless, providing a safe sea lane access to our attack forces. Sea mine warfare can be used as an instrument of precisely measured military pressure. For example, a harbor can be sealed off for a predetermined period of time, simply to indicate to the enemy the effects of a blockade. If the first mining did not produce the desired results, a second effort could be started of longer duration, or the task force commander could then impose a surface blockade or combine the two for maximum effect. Delivery agents can pick and choose their time for minefield laying to suit their own best advantage. Visibility, sonar defenses, even enemy deployment can be taken into consideration. Movement of enemy forces requires access to sea lanes which must be defended by some sort of screening forces. And even under the best of circumstances, a surface blockade of these enemy movements is easier to detect than is a minefield blockade. In the past, ships of war engaged in battle wherever and whenever they encountered each other at sea. The modern naval forces expend most of their energy in attacking from the sea rather than fighting upon it. Their efforts are usually directed at selected targets, requiring weapons which are also selected. The sea mine is such a weapon. It can be tailored to destroy only submarines or selected surface ships. For example, a fairly coarse setting on a magnetic mine would respond to a merchant ship signature, but it is unlikely to be detonated by small wooden fishing boats. Pressure mines can also be set to discriminate against small ships and minor surface craft as targets. Acoustic mines may be adjusted to high-frequency signatures, permitting passage of all ships not turbine-powered. But the greatest effectiveness can be obtained by merely an open announcement of the establishment of a minefield. It is a peril to all who would challenge it. Yet it is harmful only to those who do attempt to challenge it. It establishes a permanent barrier that is impenetrable from either direction, one that will remain effective in all conditions of visibility, weather, and sea. Enemy minesweepers can, of course, attack it in an effort to reduce the threat. But the minefield can be continually replenished. The oceans of the world are connected by many sea lanes and regions where effective mine barriers can be established. Narrow, shallow water straits can be mined to stop enemy ships and submarines from gaining entry into the open ocean. Barrier forces can then be deployed to establish a maximum threat to the enemy. Our destroyers can fly the seas. Killer submarines can move in. Carriers screened by the destroyers can launch their attack aircraft in search of the enemy. All join to pose a threat that will be hard to penetrate. An effective blockade has been established. With the advent of the Korean ceasefire in 1953, there came new classes of minesweepers. Non-magnetic wooden ships and iron men once more became a reality for the new fleet. The MSO is the basic minesweeper of the Navy, an ocean-going vessel that can travel to any part of the world and maintain itself on station for long periods of time. To counter the shallow water mine threat in sea mine warfare, the minesweeping fleet must be able to move rapidly to the area of conflict. This is the Ozark, an MCS, or Mine Countermeasures Weapons System. She is 485 feet long. She carries 20 MSL launches for shallow water work and 2 minesweeping helicopters, and also provides flag facilities for the Mine Countermeasures Commander. Her minesweeping helicopters can tow a moored sweep ahead of the MSLs, providing added safety for the sweepers during minesweeping operations. These 36-foot minesweeping launches are an outgrowth of the small boats first used so effectively for shallow water mine work in Korea. Each launch is capable of mine hunting and sweeping moored, acoustic, and magnetic mines in shallow water regions. During shallow water mine hunting and mine sweeping operations, the position of the MSLs is controlled by the MCS by the use of radar and master reference buoys. When an MSL locates a mine with its own portable detection and classification sonar, it launches a marker. EOD swimmers then move in to recover or neutralize the mine as desired. Magnetic mines can be swept by a single mine-sweeping launch or in combination with another MSL. In addition, it can tow and provide power to conventional acoustic sweep devices. The MCS operates very much as a carrier in that it supports its own weapon system, the MSLs and helos. In addition to the shallow water work of the MSLs, it can also provide limited logistics support for MSOs. This artist's conception of the Navy's newest minesweeper, the MSS, or Minesweeper Special, will give the Navy its only means of sweeping pressure mines. Converted from a 441-foot Liberty hull, which is refitted with foam flotation, the ship is manned by a limited crew stationed in an especially protected bridge area during sweeping. Underway, the ship's hull will provide the proper pressure signature to detonate pressure mines. Today, when far-ranging nuclear submarines, missilery, and space satellites consume a great part of our development effort and planning, it is well to remember that mine warfare is as effective today as it has ever been in the past.
Since the early days of our country, guns have been almost as much a part of the Navy as its ships. And it was only natural that the art and science of naval gunnery would become just as important as the designing and building of ships. In fact, as naval ships came to be primarily regarded as gun platforms, gun requirements increasingly influenced ships' design and size. Thus, as we developed a technology that permitted us to build larger and larger guns, our naval ships also got progressively larger, culminating in the huge, heavily armored dreadnoughts of World War II. Most of these large ships carried 16-inch guns, and some of the Japanese battleships had 18-inch guns. We were also planning to build guns of this size when the interest in guns began to wane. It was the coming of air power that first raised doubts about the effectiveness of naval guns. For with aircraft, the Navy now had to contend with small, fast-moving targets, capable of delivering deadly blows to ships of all sizes, particularly the large ones that had come to be considered practically invulnerable. Not only were the guns heavy, but their fire control systems weren't suited to small, fast-moving targets, and neither was their ammunition. With the effectiveness of air power recognized, a new ship of the line, the aircraft carrier, evolved, which gradually eclipsed the heavy gun battleships and cruisers as the major offensive platform of the Navy. However, carriers were also vulnerable and had to be protected. This job fell to the cruisers and destroyers. Yet their guns had a tough time countering aircraft targets. Nevertheless, with developments such as radar fire control and radio proximity fuses, the Navy was still able to effectively combat air attacks with its guns. Actually, the guns were very effective until, with their kamikaze suicidal attacks, the Japanese began using human-guided missiles. When the guns we had were unable to cope with this new threat, the Navy began looking for more effective measures. We knew we had to increase accuracy. The answer seemed to be in some form of steering, such as intelligence, in the projectile itself. The era of the guided weapon was dawning. But at that time, the electronics needed for guiding a bullet could not survive gun launch forces. A gentler initial acceleration was needed. Consequently, attention was focused on guidance of rocket-launched weapons. There were also other considerations undermining the Navy's traditional reliance on guns. The great cost of building, manufacturing, and manning larger ships strained naval budgets. And so we stopped building the larger ships and began retiring those we already had. The remaining ships were left with only 5-inch guns. With gun systems receiving lower and lower priority, many of our newer ships were only able to accommodate 3-inch guns. It was the development of missiles that made possible this downgrading of gun systems. And soon missile launchers were replacing guns on practically all the ships. This reliance on missiles reached a point where ships were being built or refitted with almost no provision for guns. The result was a severe lessening in these ships' defense against a close-in attack on the surface, and making them useless in fire support for amphibious operations or any offensive anti-surface role. The extensive use of our naval guns against shore targets in Vietnam pointed up many of their shortcomings. The performance and reliability was that to be expected of a technology that was now 30 or 40 years old. Many broke down or wore out under continuous use, and their accuracy was poor when compared to target-seeking missiles. With the development of solid-state electronic components, sturdy enough to be fired from a gun, the Navy renewed its interest in its guns and decided to embark on a gun improvement program. The program had 3 objectives. First, update the gun mount so that its capabilities would be more in line with current naval needs. Second, improve fire control by simplifying the system and giving it greater versatility, accuracy, and reliability. And third, develop a new ammunition with improved safety, effectiveness, and range. The gun system selected for improvement was the 5-inch 54 Mark 42 Mod 7. The improved mount would become known as the Mod 10. To make this conversion, the power drive, hydraulic system, and receiver regulators had to be replaced, and the hydraulic fuse setters had to be improved. The vacuum tube type electronics were replaced with solid-state electronics, and more reliable proximity switches were installed. Operational control of the mount was transferred to a centralized console below deck. And finally, the new mount was given the capability of simulating operations without actually cycling ammunition through it. Improvement of the Mark 68 fire control system called for completely new equipment. For example, the old analog computer was replaced with the Navy's newest digital computer. Not only was it much simpler, smaller, and lighter, but it was much more reliable and efficient. And what's particularly important today, it costs much less to build and maintain. The conical scan radar used in the old fire control system was replaced with a completely new monopulse radar. The new radar not only provided greater accuracy, but also a low altitude acquisition and tracking capability that the old radar never had. This was made possible by incorporating a low target mode that eliminated the usual interference from surface reflection, causing multiple images to be returned. A new electro-optical sensor system was also added to fire control. One part of this sensor system is a thermal optical receiver, which serves as the eyes of the fire control system. This receiver permits the target to actually be seen on a TV-type screen, either day or night, and at the different command centers on the ship. Another part of the electro-optical sensor system automatically drives the director, so that a line of sight on the target is constantly maintained. The sensor also has a laser system, which can be used for range finding or target illumination. Singly or together, these two laser functions give gunnery an accuracy that was never before possible. The development of new ammunition was prompted by reports from Vietnam of ammunition exploding in gun barrels. The cause of those accidents was improper loading or packing of the explosive charge in the projectile, which the manufacturer was not always able to detect in normal inspections. In order to make inspection of the explosive easier, the new projectile was designed as a two-piece assembly. This made it possible to use an encapsulated charge that could be thoroughly inspected before it was placed in the projectile. The plastic capsule also served as a mold so that the explosive could be cast. And this eliminated a number of hazardous procedures in the loading and assembly of the projectile. By completely separating the explosive from the fuse, another hazard was eliminated. The new design would also accommodate all NATO fuses. A new plastic rotating band replaced the metal one previously used, thus eliminating the need for critical materials, such as copper. And since the band breaks away after leaving the barrel of the gun, the projectile has less drag in flight. This, together with the improved ballistic shape and the use of a more energetic propellant, gave the new ammunition ranges which formerly could only have been attained with rocket assistance. By using new materials and construction, the fragmentation capability of the projectile was increased to give it greater effectiveness. Another important new addition to the system is the velocimeter, which is a low-powered Doppler radar that measures the velocity of the projectile as it leaves the gun barrel. The velocimeter permits gunners to precisely and continuously gauge the performance of both ammunition and guns, and thus increase their accuracy. When we add up all the improvements and innovations produced by the programs, we have an impressive list of gains. Not only is the gun safer, but it's also easier to use and requires a smaller crew. Its operational performance and reliability are much higher. Where the old gun had an expectancy of 135 rounds before failure, the new system will fire an average of 338 rounds without failure. And equally important is the increased effectiveness of the system, with its greater range and accuracy. However, we can't begin to appreciate the importance of these improvements until they're coupled with the great advances made in developing guided projectiles. For only then can we begin to see the vastly increased defensive and offensive capability the Navy can now have in its guns. The development of the guided projectile, coupled with gun improvements, now gives our guns the potential accuracy comparable to guided missiles. One of the principal advantages of guided projectiles is that, unlike their missile counterparts, they don't need complex guidance systems to place them close enough to the target during the critical homing phase of guided flight to be effective. This is particularly true in long-range surface-to-surface operations. This means that guided projectiles are simpler, and consequently less susceptible to failure. It also means that they're smaller and require less storage and handling space aboard ship, and that they're also harder to hit with counterfire. With all their advantages, the cost of guided projectiles is only a fraction of that of comparable missiles. However, in spite of the many important advances introduced by the Gun Improvement Program and guided projectile development, they still do not reflect the potential capability of naval gunnery. For technology, which is directly applicable to gun systems, is not standing still. This is particularly true with both the 5-inch 54 caliber Mark 45 and the 8-inch 55 caliber Mark 71. Both of these guns, recently introduced to the fleet, were produced by a technology of the 50s. Our new Mark 45 is smaller and only 1/3 the weight of the Mark 42. But we had to sacrifice almost half the firepower in the Mark 45 to get this reduction. Technology will permit a weight reduction today without a sacrifice in firepower. In addition, fire rates can be varied from much lower rates to much higher rates. The advantage of tailoring the fire rate to that demanded by the threat is deserving of much serious consideration. The range of the 5-inch gun can be extended to as much as 20 miles with low-risk solid propellants, a range previously attainable only with 16-inch guns. The same technology could also produce a lighter 8-inch gun, 35% lighter than our new Mark 71, and capable of firing guided projectiles over 50 nautical miles with pinpoint accuracy. These even newer weapons would require 70% less maintenance and have much greater reliability, with an expectancy of 3,000 rounds of firing before failure, as opposed to 338 rounds for the Mark 42 Mod 10 and 862 for the Mark 45. The savings in installation and checkout time would be even more impressive. The shipyard installation and checkout time for the Mark 42 is 1 year, with 670 hours just to install and connect wiring. A new 5-inch gun could be installed in 24 hours and wiring connected in just 15 hours. The timely application of advancements in technology to weapons such as these will keep our Navy the great mobile defensive and striking force that it has always been, second to none.
The enemy shore off Korea. Those mountains are alive with guns, ammunition, and supplies on their way to the communist front. Our ship is here to see they don't arrive. In the moment before the big guns start firing, there's always a certain tenseness, reflected in the quiet attitudes of the men at general quarters. With the guns moving into firing position, I take my station on the bridge, feeling, as every battleship captain at times like this, the responsibility of command. For this is a war in which every broadside must count. when the guns are firing efficiently, like this, that you can be proud of your crew down below. It takes men with Navy know-how in the turrets to feed those big guns, men who've learned their job through long hours of training and hard work. Coordination and teamwork move the shells smoothly into position.
Stand by!
And that's TNT in powder bags, which must be handled delicately and surely. It takes 6 of those charges to hurl a shell deep down the communist throat.
Stand by! Stand by!
Those guns must be aimed properly, too. For this job, my officers are at work in the main battery plot. These gunnery officers are tackling the fire control problem of the action we call interdiction, the destruction of enemy supply lines and rear area facilities.
Right, 217. Go!
Our mission off Korea, to halt the flow of supplies which keep the communist armies fed and equipped. Mostly, we concentrate on the coastline railways, bridges, supply dumps, and depots. But we can shell targets as far as 20 miles inland when necessary, and planes off our carriers can take care of targets farther inland. In the Korean emergency, our ship has been put to work in shore bombardment. My men like the job. They call it exporting steel to some tough customers. I call it making a battleship captain feel pride in his command. But elsewhere at sea, we're still engaged in our traditional job with the fleet, the floating fortress, which provides anti-aircraft and heavy gun protection for the carriers and smaller ships, and forms a nucleus for offensive action when required. But there's another side to this ship when the guns are stilled and the battle's over for a while. That's when she comes to mean something more than a fortress, something a lot more personal to her men aboard, something all hands can call home. Of course, you've got to keep a home clean, and here are some of my boys doing homework. To make the varsity on this ship, you have to be a member of the scrub team. Cleanliness is a personal thing, too, and we hold inspections often enough to keep the ship and her crew in trim. Tons of clothes arrive in the ship's laundry during the year. Dungarees and whites receive the full treatment in the tubs until they're hauled out limp but clean. What makes a ship happy? Part of the answer is having all the facilities of a hometown, including a well-equipped bakery. It takes 850 loaves of bread a day to feed our crew of 2,700 men. But the specialty of any bakery is their cake. And here, a baker cuts his masterpiece into enough small pieces to satisfy the crew. Of course, life isn't all cake, and neither is Navy chow. What this cook is cutting, in case landlubbers don't recognize it, is beef. Good, juicy, inch-thick steaks. Hungry? The steaks won't be ready until tomorrow, but meanwhile, there's good news on the grill. Sizzling ham. Tastes as good as it looks, and the men are happy to stand in line to prove it. Chow down, fore and aft, and the crew starts attacking that chow with the zest it deserves. In another compartment, the Marines aboard are having a birthday celebration. The Admiral is on hand to join in the festivities. But the high point of the affair seems to be the dessert. Man, that's real eating. On a ship as on shore, you can't keep up with the world without a newspaper. We publish our own in the print shop and get to read it after the editors finish admiring their own work. There's a ship's service where you can buy everything from watches to soap. Not as big as the corner drugstore, but just as well supplied for Navy needs. At the ice cream fountain, the star attraction is the Big Dipper, and the crew seems to appreciate it. Medicine for all the crew's ills comes from this compartment, the pharmacy. The formula this hospital corpsman is mixing looks rather mysterious. In another medical compartment, our eye, ear, nose, and throat specialist looks a little mysterious himself. Skilled Navy doctors are on board with modern surgical equipment to handle any emergency in the operating room. But for some of the sheiks of the crew, the real emergencies happen in the barbershop, where a short clip can be the unkindest cut of all. The mail room is the most popular spot in the ship. By this time, most of the crew have learned that the only way to earn their letter is to write one. And these are going out by air. A waiting helicopter is ready to start them on the first lap of their journey across half the world. Below decks, the activity of this mighty ship is ceaseless. In the engine room, the Black Gang is on the job, keeping the propellers in motion. The machine shop is the mechanical repair center of the ship. A combination of skilled hands and modern equipment grinds, molds, and refits gears for use. The electrical shop is the maintenance center for the miles of wire on a battleship. Here, an electrician rewinds just a few feet of it. Mechanical spare parts for almost any emergency line the shelves of this shop, including pipe fittings, bolts, shackles, and grinding stones. If you want to get the word, this is the place to go. In fact, the ship's library stocks millions of them, written by the world's finest authors. This man, high up the coast of Korea, takes a moment off to read about more glamorous regions down under. Sooner or later, almost every man needs legal advice of one sort or another. A legal officer is aboard to give expert advice and aid when needed. In this shop are the men who keep the Navy from coming apart at the seams. A skillful use of needle and thread, applied with modern sewing machines, keeps uniforms as good as new. Shoes take a beating on the spacious decks of a battleship, and sooner or later, they all end up in the cobbler's shop for repairs. Among other qualifications, a cobbler has to like the taste of nails. So another day off the enemy coast of Korea has passed. Our ship has grown one day older, and the crew and myself one day wiser in the ways of battle in these far eastern waters. And now, at sunset, one of my men steps up to make an announcement.
Now hear this. All hands silence for sunset prayer.
This is Chaplain Kapelsinski with the sunset prayer.
Oh my God, as we prepare for rest tonight,
we place our souls into thy hands, giving thee again our last thoughts of this busy fighting day. We desire that you always occupy the first and main place in our lives. We thank thee for thy loving care and protection during this day of battle. Increase in us, O Lord, faithfulness to our duties, so that our preparedness may keep our country safe. Be with us when we are lonely and miss the dear ones back home. Be with them as thou art with us. Help us to keep our hearts pure and our hands clean. Protect us in the hour of danger, and be thou our shield and defender. Cause war to cease, we pray. And when peace comes, may we do our part in the building of a new and better world in which love shall prevail and the Spirit of Christ cover the earth. May it be thy will to grant us an early peace. Amen.
So dawn breaks again in these waters, and briefly in the morning quiet, a kind of peace seems to reign. Yet those of us aboard this ship, captain and crew, know the day may bring battle and turmoil, along with its daily ration of work, laughter, and just plain living. When it does, we'll be ready. For this is the life you ask for when you serve aboard a battleship, floating fortress of the nation's fleet.